Good morning, everybody. Well, now it's afternoon. I hope everyone is doing well today. I do apologize. First and foremost, my video for the Tuesday's episode was I put the wrong link in there, so I'm kind of working as a little bit of a mess this week, and I'm a little late to record this video for today, so I do apologize about that. However, we're going to be working with that today. I do want to mention real quick, again, to make sure that you are looking into the Turnitin project. Again, that is just a basis to say you are looking at a specific client, and with that specific client, you are going to promote who you want to work for and why. And again, it can be major companies, it can be very small, it can be someone you work for, it can be someone you've just heard of. It really, world is your oyster when it comes to this kind of communication here. And so we'll talk about this throughout the course of the semester, and again, as we go through these assignments as they come along. We'll make sure that, again, we move towards a good plans book. So just keep that in mind. Like I said, I think we'll be very successful with it, one way or the other, in terms of what you pick. I don't think it's going to matter too terribly much. So, again, just send me an email when you get that opportunity. Or, excuse me, put it up on Turnitin. Or if you have any questions, send me an email. So today, we're going to talk a little bit about the notion of virality. And the major focus that I want to look into here when it comes to David Meerman Scott's perspective is, first and foremost, what is virality? What does it mean to go viral? We're going to talk a little bit about memeology in terms of the essence of sharing memes, because it's interesting. Meme kind of took off on itself in terms of what it used to be versus what it is now. In terms of what it has become in the digital culture. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. And we'll also get into a little bit of a notion that if you've taken a marketing class before, you may know this particular term, which is called the diffusion of innovation. And this has to do a lot with that virality. So David Meerman Scott looks at this notion of what does it mean to go viral. But before I get into that, let me just say that first things first, we've talked about quite a bit through the chapters in David Meerman Scott that we're looking at these new media technologies, and it's important to use these new media technologies. But let's set the record straight that major celebrities and television are still very valid in our universe. And I know some of you have brought that up in your forum posts to say, look, there's still people that don't believe in the internet in terms of using it. And they also still use television. They still know big name celebrities, and this is how they consume their media. And that's fine. And I actually noticed through a lot of your media logs that many of you look at basic cable or air television stations, your big NBCs, ABCs, Fox, for instance, that you're not necessarily looking through cable television. And again, fine. No trouble there. And so, some examples of that is, Ellen DeGeneres broke Twitter, for goodness sake, with her tweet, I think, at the Academy Awards, with a selfie. And again, it was still very much a big part of our culture in terms of how many shares it got on Twitter. Kim Kardashian did the same thing in terms of, quote, breaking the internet with one of her magazine provocative photos. And John Oliver, I don't know if y'all are fans or not of the HBO show Last Week Tonight. You may not get HBO. But he broke the FCC website in response to the idea of net neutrality. And again, all judgments aside for what you believe in terms of net neutrality. But it was very interesting for the consumer base that was watching John Oliver's show. They decided to kind of take action based on his call to action, to really take this into consideration and really put their public opinions out there. So all in all, really cool stuff in terms of what we can use in terms of that virality. And again, these major celebrities and major television programs still can do this and do it quite easily. But it doesn't necessarily mean that they're the only ones that can do it. And I think that's one of the big things that David Meerman Scott was talking about, is that we can do this too in terms of going viral. And So first and foremost, what does it mean to go viral? And before we get into that, we'll talk about memeology. And so if you know what an internet meme is, or you've seen one before, granted, we use the term meme quite loosely, especially within digital culture. They are ideas and behaviors that spread from one person to another in a culture. And so if you think about this in terms of the areas within our culture that we celebrate, that we build around our culture. So, the fact that here at a university system, we have a winter break based around major holidays. So, you've got Thanksgiving, you've got Christmas, or, Hanukkah or Kwanzaa or whatever you celebrate. And again, we talk about this in kind of the holiday spirit of, how we base that into our culture. And so those ideas are like-minded ideas, and they spread from person to person. And this is why the term viral comes into play, is because virality is that process of that meme going widespread. So it can be one thing to have something in your culture in terms of a meme. So like you create something and it takes off within a few of your close-knit circles. That doesn't mean it goes viral, but it is still considered a meme. Because again, it's still within your local culture. And again, we can look at cultures in the terms of, the state of North Carolina. We can talk about it in the western part of the state of North Carolina. We can talk about it in Boone in general, has its own culture. Same with Asheville, has its own culture. These major components are still within culture, within memes. But when it goes viral, it's that widespread of information that's really interesting, and again, it kind of takes a life of its own, quite like a virus does, as it latches from person to person. I know that's sounding kind of gross in this case, but I mean, David Meerman Scott talks about a lot in Gangnam Style, for instance, and if you've never seen the Psy video of Gangnam Style, which I imagine a lot of you have at one point or another, it was the most viewed music video of all time. I don't know if it still holds the record for the most viewed video on YouTube. I don't think it does anymore, but I can't remember what exactly it was. But we can also look at other places where, take for example on Twitter, where Wendy's said, how many retweets is it going to take to get like a year or a lifetime supply of nuggets? And Wendy's sent him a number, and it was the most retweeted tweet of all time. And again, bringing that into our culture made a big deal and made a big difference in this case. But there are so many examples, and I'm going to post a 10th anniversary YouTube video that kind of goes in a lot of memes. One of them in particular was, I don't know if anybody remembers the Harlem Shake, and the Harlem Shake again took a real life of its own where everybody was getting involved with it. They had a lot of people doing a lot of different things. And it became, again, this big sensation to the point where someone wrote some JavaScript, which is web development tools to create website, and it's code. So, everything, all this code goes into the website, and that's how you get all the pretty pictures and layout. Granted, that's just one language of it. Anyway, but someone was really clever with their JavaScript and made a whole website do the Harlem Shake. And unfortunately, I can't show that here, but it really is interesting of how people, again, it took off on a life of its own so much that it actually became reappropriated to where a couple of big news stations had people from Harlem and said, that's not the Harlem Shake. Well, of course it's not, but they wanted to show the reappropriation for what that was. Albeit, it didn't work. Although, some people said, well, this isn't what they claimed it to be. What they're doing in terms of the viral videos, that's not what the Harlem Shake is. It had been a little bit too late for them to change it. It was almost like the person who talked about, I'm going to go way off track a little bit, but I promise there's a point to it. Researcher talked about alpha dogs and packs. He later recanted his research and said, no, my observations were incorrect, but the story took off. And so people started to really believe that, there are alpha dogs and they're in the wild environment, even though his research at least indicated that this was not necessarily the case. And so believe what you want about that. I'm not taking a side one way or the other. I'm just telling you how this story went. Again, the gentleman recanted his own findings and retracted. So again, these are things that can take a life of their own, and they make good stories. And so how does memeology apply to marketing? And how does virality apply to marketing? First and foremost, the example that David Meerman Scott used is Mentos and Coke, or Diet Coke. I have to make that distinction because it wouldn't do anything with regular Coke. And I don't know if you've seen this or tried this, but Mentos and Diet Coke causes some kind of infusion between the two, and it makes the carbonation fizz up and almost like in a complete volcano. And think about what that inspired. First and foremost, there was a viral video, and I'll post it up on As You Learn, that showed it's like an orchestrated event where they did Mentos and Coke, where they'd set off one bottle and they do these extravagant, almost like water fountain scenes to classical music, and it was really cool. But other places did that. In terms of Jackass, for instance, used a video with Mentos and Coke. Mythbusters, for one, used a video with Mentos and Coke. And yes, it was great that Coca-Cola got this exposure if you're Coca-Cola. But think about what it did for Mentos. And, for a previous marketing scheme that was the Fresh Maker, where they showed the little tube of, I don't know if tube's the right, a little package of Mentos. And, they're really excited about it because, all the hard stuff, and they made the best out of a bad situation, which oddly enough had good crowdsourcing too, in terms of people making parody videos, because it was just so goofy. But again, it shows what Mentos has really done in terms of that virality. And it doesn't necessarily have to be good. In this case, with Mentos and Coke, it was just a really cool science experiment that people played with. I mentioned the last class in terms of Post-it notes, Legos, Nalgene bottles. A student in another one of my classes mentioned GoPro, which was a great example. These were all notions of really positive things that we could utilize within this virality. Whereas, if you remember that Super Bowl video I showed, it's still up on As You Learn if you still want to take a look at it, in terms of is Super Bowl advertising even worth it? And one of the things you mentioned was the notion of Puppy Monkey Baby. I don't know if you've seen that commercial. Personally, I don't think it's worth your time. But they got a lot of reactions out of it. And in fact, a lot of major gamers and YouTubers reacted to it. And even the YouTube channel, it's called the Fine Brothers. And they do adults react to, teens react to, kids react to, elders react to, all sorts of different entertainment and media. And this was, in particular, one of the ones they showed. I think they showed this one, where, a lot of people were like, I don't know what's going on with Mountain Dew here. I don't know why there's a pug with a baby diaper and a tail growing out of him. And, this is just really weird and stupid. But it's more exposure for Mountain Dew. And I think that's important to consider, is that some of these videos, although really stupid, again, you could look at the Burger King commercial that spawn off so much stuff. Again, making fun of it, but still getting a lot of exposure. So, again, these aren't necessarily the greatest examples for it, but they do work in some regard. But good examples I can take into account is there is a show, I think it's based off of YouTube specifically, but they have it on things like Netflix. It's called Ruby, and it's spelled RWBY, and it's American anime. And this is actually made by a couple of self-starting YouTubers that just like video games and like to do things with video games in terms of creating cool web series shows. One of the other ones is called Red versus Blue. It's real popular on YouTube in this case. But they have react videos, so they have people watching them. So here's the content that's being produced, and now we've got another person who's reacting to the content that's being produced. So all these people who are doing are just watching other people watch the show. And they get thousands of viewers and thousands of likes and thousands of subscribers, you know? And this is a really interesting point to be making here, is that, you know, it's one thing to have good content, and you want to have good content, but you want this loss of control. In other words, I know we've talked about controlling the narrative quite frequently. You've got to start the narrative. But if it's positive, it can kind of take a life of its own, and it actually works out in a really good sense. And it can work that way negatively too. So if you have bad negative press, for instance, you know, the virality can take over, and, you know, a lot of bad stuff can happen, even if it's not necessarily or inherently true. So again, it works in two different ways. But if you got a good positive thing going, something light, it can take off in a very positive way. And these people who do these videos or write about them, it's shameless self-promotion. So if you've got bloggers or vloggers, sure, it's shameless self-promotion, but they're getting free exposure. But you're getting free exposure as well. So you can see this a lot in video game videos on YouTube, where a person tries out a video game and they utilize what they have based on, you know, what company sent to them, and they say, you know, even if they don't like it, it's still exposure to the masses. And so, and a lot of times they're pretty easy about it. And what I mean by that is they'll say, I don't like the game, but you might, you know, you're just like, I don't want to. You see a lot of that rhetoric in these types of videos, and that makes for a good motion to look at. So, and again, it's all about what we can bring to the table in terms of working with that virality, because again, it takes off in a life of its own, but if we can kind of poke into the narrative a little bit, we can make a good difference. And let's go back to Mentos for a second. And the David Meron Scott chapter talked about The Tonight Show, and Mentos laid out the red carpet for the guys who made that video of, again, the orchestrated Mentos and Diet Coke commercial. And so, again, they had all this advertisement. They had people handing out free Mentos while they were walking, talking, that kind of thing. And again, really taking advantage of real-time marketing. And that's something that David Meron Scott is going to be talking about a lot in the upcoming chapters, as well as in his video, is this idea of real-time marketing. So within media planning, this is important because scheduling is important. You want to have a schedule for different things that you're utilizing. For example, you know, we're working with cranberries right now, and the time of season is the holidays. So, you know, you look at Thanksgiving and Christmas as the main times that people use cranberries. In fact, I think it was like 1/5 of the harvest goes towards Thanksgiving. So, I mean, really significant amount in terms of how this is scheduled. So, scheduling is important, but we can always look at things that appear. And that's what that Mentos commercial did. Another good example, and I'm kind of talking about minty candies right now, but Stride Gum is another cool example of good viral marketing with a video series. Granted, this was almost 10 years ago, with Where the Hell is Matt? And I don't know if y'all have ever seen this, but it's a computer programmer from Seattle who went on a worldwide trip and just did this really stupid dance that he used to do to, you know, entertain his buddies, to say, I know I'm doing it right here. Again, this is going to be awesome if this is the thumbnail, everybody. So he did this really stupid dance to say, like, hey, buddy, it's time to go to lunch. And he would just do it until his friend's like, okay, I'm done with work. So he would do this around the world, and he'd show these little places of where he was. And so Stride Gum was like, we need to get on this. And so he said, we'll pay for your next trip. So the first one was all on Matt. The second and third, I believe, was all paid for by Stride Gum. And what was really interesting about it was they didn't ask for like a logo to be represented on the video. They didn't ask that, you had to mention Stride Gum or you had to be chewing Stride Gum on the video. All they had was wristbands. And I think it was just 1 year they had wristbands where the people dancing in the video, and in one video they have a lot of them, that for insurance, it was for insurance policies, that nobody would get hurt while they were dancing. And so, again, they put on these little wristbands that were sponsored by Stride Gum. So, again, everything going viral. And a lot of people made videos of their dancing experience. I will post this up on As You Learn. I think it's important to show this one. But, again, really cool example with Matt and using Stride Gum. In this case, I can't remember his last name. So, what do we use and what do we utilize in terms of going viral? Because, it's one thing to say, hey, everybody, all you have to do is post a viral video and, you'll get great exposure for your marketing. Yeah, easier said than done, right? How do we go viral? And so David Meerman Scott talks about the ideas of something being valuable, easy to emulate, and unique, something that's never been done before. And again, we go back to, it's really easy to do something that's valuable, easy, and unique to be able to do. In fact, no, it's not. It's very challenging to have a viral video. We can post and post and post until, we are blue in the face. However, if it doesn't catch on, then we have a little bit of a problem. But this is where the additional reading that I didn't post, but I still want to talk about, which was an article by, their last names are Milkman and Berger. So if you're hungry, you've just gotten a little hungrier now because what great last names. I'm not even making fun of it. I really do enjoy those last names. They mentioned that positivity is major in terms of what you're posting. So, it's one thing to be valuable, easy, and unique, but it also should be positive in some way. And this is important because the internet, despite what you may read on YouTube comments, the internet is typically a very positive place. In fact, the people who are angry and write these horrible, horrible things, and they do write horrible, horrible things, there's a lot of dissenters towards that. And so, and the worst is if you go like on a video about like suicide prevention and you read these nasty comments, and other people will just put their phone numbers and say, call me, or here's a suicide prevention hotline, call them. They're like, we're here to help, it's not worth it, that kind of thing. And that's really cool, really good rhetoric and positive rhetoric. And again, this is what Milkman and Berger mention, is that positivity in terms of valence is very key when it comes to memeology. But he also mentions that valence might not be enough, because if you think about it, we're dealing with two separate things, positive and negative. Well, in their design of their study, they said, okay, it may not be enough to say if something's positive, it's viral worthy, or if it's negative, it's not. What about those subcategories? Because negative and positive can mean a whole lot of different things. And the example I want to allude to is something they mentioned was the notion of anger and angst. And so if you've got a post that angers somebody or gives them, again, that angst to be able to react, that's a negative post, but it can still go viral in this case. And so I'll give you a good example of that. And again, kind of putting a positive spin on it in terms of, in this case, anti-bullying. So I don't know if you've ever seen the article for what's called Dancing Man. And this gentleman is, I know he's still around, is an overweight gentleman who was dancing at a club, and I think it was either on Reddit or 4chan, where the person took took two pictures of this gentleman dancing, and they said, I think the rhetoric of it was, looking at this specimen, and I think that's key that they use that term specimen. They said dancing. He kept dancing until we started laughing, and then he stopped. So again, 2 pictures of one, the gentleman dancing, and one, the following picture after they were laughing at him, of him having his head down. And so this created so much anger in the internet, and rightfully so. You know, that's terrible to say about anybody in that regard, and what's called fat shaming in this case. And what was interesting was a lady in California said, "Who is this person? Who is this person?" So, okay, it's important to note, they didn't give any attention to the people that were making fun of the gentleman. Instead, she said, "Who is the person dancing?" And she wrote, "I've got about 100 ladies in Los Angeles that would love to dance with this gentleman." And so this exploded in the internet, in terms of social media, like, again, Twitter, where a lot of people started paying attention to this, and they got behind Dancing Man, as he so was called. And he was a gentleman out of England, came to the United States, had Pharrell and Moby do a concert. And again, it was all about him dancing with a lot of women that said, you know, we want to dance with you. We don't want you to feel down about who you are, and that kind of thing. And again, really cool rhetoric. And again, it just goes to show you that this anger and angst can make things go viral. You don't want to be the one responsible for the anger and angst. But there's a lot of that notion in terms of defense in this case. And again, the results spoke for themselves in terms of the virality of it. So I know I'm running out a little bit out of time here, but David Meerman Scott does mention the ideas of virality of marketing, and the rules to them. He calls it the rules of the rave. And with this, you know, a couple of key principles is, first and foremost, and I like this one, nobody cares about your product except you. And I like this one because if you've ever watched the movie Wolf of Wall Street, one of my favorite scenes, and just so happens I have a pen in my hand, and he goes, "Sell me this pen." And, you know, kind of think about this for a second. If I came up to you and said, "Sell me this pen," what would you say? You might look at it and say, you know, the features of it. You may look at the fact that it's Papermate and it's a good brand. You may look at the fact that it's like it doesn't run out of ink. You know, all these claims and specifications of what sets you apart from your competitor. And in the end, he was like, that doesn't work. And David Meerman Scott would agree with this. And in the scene, the way he gets the pen sold is someone says, "Can you sign your name?" And the gentleman who didn't have the pen says, "Well, I don't have a pen." He goes, and he throws it at him. He goes, "There, supply and demand." So there's basic needs. And so this is the focus that we want to look at in terms of this virality, is the notion of need and letting them work with that narrative. And so if you don't want to have any incentives, you don't want to coerce, if it's good, people will share it. And let diffusion take over, which is this model right here. So what you'll see here, I'll see if I can move my pen in the right direction. This is your innovator category. I'm doing a very loose version of it here. Your innovator category is going to be the people who use specific products in a very not popular way. So they're trendsetters. And that can be hard to do in a lot of cases. And again, this is a very oversimplified version of it. Then you've got your early adopters. And these are people who get this information. They're using this information that the strivers, the innovators were doing before, but now it's starting to take off. It's starting to get popular. You may have like a band or something that you kind of worked as an innovator, like you were the first to hear about them, and then they started getting really popular. And then you get into, I'm pretty sure in diffusions of innovation, there's a early majority and late majority, but just for this purposes, you go into the late majority, and this is where it becomes mainstream. And that's kind of when it takes over a life of its own, to where even the last one, which is called laggards, start to take over as well, that everybody's involved. and it's almost commonplace it's now commonplace to be a part of the group instead of not being a part of the group. Whereas with the innovators, it was more popular to not be a part of the group than it is being a part of the group. And that's kind of the point of being an innovator. So let diffusion take over. And by the way, with this diffusion, it's basically saying once you get over this hump right here, things start to move in the direction that you want it to. In terms of your brand gets this free exposure, in terms of everybody's talking about it. And if you can get over that hump, that makes a big, big difference in terms of what content is being produced. So encourage people to participate and use what's called good newsjacking. And newsjacking, go back up here, needs to be done around this area right here, right as the story is getting popular. So David Meerman Scott will mention how Oakley put their brand in with the Chilean miners. And it's a really cool example where they were like, we know that you've been underground for a long time. We want you to be able to transition to the harsh light of the day really easily. So they gave them Oakley sunglasses down in the mine. And so when they came out, all the news had Oakley sunglasses. Really clever advertising. Ethical, I'm not sure, but it was still very clever. And again, it was when this story was really getting popular. And so, again, everybody was seeing it. And again, this isn't planned. This is contingency, real-time marketing that is going to be mentioned here. So again, encourage people to participate. One thing I'll mention is content for Facebook posts. Do people really like your Facebook posts? I've read a couple articles in terms of the science of a Facebook post, and a lot of us will sit there and say, we really do care about our family members, and so when they do well, we're really excited for them. But in a lot of ways, we want to participate too. And so this is why right now I'm doing my own little experiment, if you will. It's called the Fond Board, which if you ever stop by my office, again, 129 Walker Hall, you'll notice my whiteboard that has topics every week, and it's open forum for everybody to use. In fact, what I'll do is I'll start posting forums online just for fun. You don't have to participate in these, and it won't be graded for anything, but it's just something fun that takes a life of its own. So I do this here at my office, but I also post it on Facebook. And last week's topic was, for example, song covers that were actually better than the original. So my example was Johnny Cash's Hurt. I feel like that was better than the original song that was produced there. And so it took off. And again, I didn't have a whole lot of responses on the board, but online I had quite a few. And again, this really does promote this idea of almost like virtual point of purchase, if you will. Again, pointing out to where you want to get this exposure. And virality in marketing isn't terribly hard. I mean, it's hard to get a viral thing going, but you can do different things to get yourselves in that position. For example, musicians in some forms often will give away their music for free or next to nothing. So Radiohead, for instance, said you can donate what you want to our album. Girl Talk is another. And granted, he's a DJ, and he basically said, pay 1 cent, pay $300, whatever you want to pay. Hell, even in Boone, we have the Farm Cafe, which they say, look, if you're not doing so hot right now in terms of finances, you can give a lunch for $1. Or, if you're doing really well and you want to give back, you can do it for $20. It's all based on how you want to do it. And again, what a great system. And set yourself apart in this case. So, okay, I know I'm going a little bit over on time here, but I guess since this is a late video, that's okay. Please email me questions you might have, especially with your topics. I'll be happy to address anything you got. If you want to talk about this particular lecture, I love virality, and it sometimes can be difficult to process what makes something go viral. So please talk about that in the comments. Please disagree with me and David Meerman Scott. I'd love to hear your input on that. And I hope you all have a good day, and I hope to hear from you Friday. All right, take care.